Picture a maze cut into a forest. Tall hedges, no way to see over them, only the narrow path in front of you and the narrow path behind. You've been walking this maze for years, certain you're exploring, certain each turn is new ground. But if you could rise above it, just once, high enough to see the whole shape from above, you would see something that would stop you cold. You are not exploring, you are circling. The same loop, worn deeper every year, disguised as new territory, because from inside the hedges, every turn feels like the first time you've taken it. This is what a default mind pattern actually is, not a metaphor for weakness, a literal, physical groove in the brain, carved by repetition until the groove becomes the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance becomes indistinguishable from choice. Neuroscience has a specific name for this efficiency: myelination. Every time a neural pathway fires, the brain wraps it in more insulation, more myelin, making that exact pathway faster and more automatic the next time. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the system working exactly as designed. The problem is that the brain does not ask whether the pathway it's reinforcing is good for you. It only asks whether the pathway has been used before. Familiarity is the only currency the groove understands. Here is where the maze was actually built, and it will not be where you expect. Most people assume their patterns of discipline, avoidance, procrastination, self sabotage were built in adulthood, shaped by recent failures or recent successes. They weren't. The deepest grooves, the ones that run underneath every adult decision you make without noticing, were carved before you had the language to describe what was happening to you. Somewhere between the ages of 2 and 7, your brain was doing something remarkable and completely outside your control. It was building its default operating patterns based entirely on what got rewarded and what got punished in the environment you happened to be born into. If effort was praised specifically, if a parent said you worked hard on that, rather than simply you're so smart, your brain built a groove connecting effort to reward. If mistakes were met with disproportionate anger or withdrawal of affection, your brain built a different groove entirely, one connecting risk to danger, one that still fires today every time you consider doing something that might fail publicly. None of this required your consent. None of it required you to be old enough to understand what was being built. The maze was under construction before you knew a maze existed. And by the time you were old enough to notice you were inside one, the hedges were already 12 feet tall. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, because it explains something that pure willpower theories of discipline have never adequately explained. You have tried to build discipline before. You have made the plan, downloaded the app, written the schedule, and within days, sometimes hours, you were back in the loop. This was never a failure of willpower. Willpower is a conscious, effortful, and metabolically expensive process run by the prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that gets tired the same way a muscle gets tired. The groove, meanwhile, requires no effort at all. It is automatic, unconscious, and already running by the time your prefrontal cortex even notices a decision needs to be made. You were never fighting a fair fight. You were bringing a tired, effortful system to compete against a pathway that has been reinforced since before you could speak in full sentences. So here is the actual trick, the one almost no video on discipline explains correctly, because most of them are still trying to sell you more willpower, more grit, more forced effort against a system that will always eventually win that fight through simple exhaustion. The trick is not to fight the groove. The trick is to become the one who is deciding which groove gets reinforced next, and to do it with enough repetition that the new path becomes the automatic one, rather than the exception you have to consciously choose every single day. This works because of the same mechanism that built the maze in the first place. Myelination does not care whether a pathway is old or new. It only cares whether the pathway is used. every single time you choose the new behavior, even in a small, almost invisible way, you are laying down insulation on a new path through the same forest. The first few times, this feels unbearably effortful because you are cutting through undergrowth that has never been touched. This is not a sign you are failing. This is the literal, physical sensation of a new groove being carved for the first time. The exhaustion is the construction noise. It is supposed to be there. Here is where the maze image earns its second meaning. The goal was never to escape the maze entirely. There is no escaping it. Every brain runs on default pathways. Always will. Because a brain that had to consciously deliberate every single action from scratch every day would collapse from the sheer metabolic cost of it. The goal is to become the one who decides where the next loop gets carved, rather than remaining a passenger inside a loop someone else carved for you before you had any say in the matter. Discipline, done correctly, is not an act of constant conscious effort. It is the slow, repeated construction of a new default until the new behavior requires the same amount of willpower the old avoidance used to require, which is to say, eventually, none at all. This reframes the entire timeline of behavior change that most people get wrong. They expect the new habit to feel automatic within a week, and when it doesn't, they conclude the method failed and abandon it, right at the exact moment the new groove was starting to form. Myelination is not instant, it compounds. The 10th repetition is genuinely easier than the first, not because you have become a fundamentally different person, but because the physical pathway itself now carries slightly more insulation than it did before. The 20th is easier still, somewhere past a critical threshold, one that differs for every behavior and every person. The new groove becomes deep enough that it starts to compete seriously with the old one for the position of default. This is not motivation. This is construction, measured in repetitions, not in feelings. So if you have been standing inside your own maze, certain that you are simply someone who lacks discipline, I want to offer you a different diagnosis, one that is both more accurate and considerably less cruel. You were not born undisciplined. You were born into a maze someone else started building before you arrived, and you have been walking its original loop ever since, mistaking familiarity for identity. The way out was never willpower applied against the loop with enough force to break it. The way out was picking up the same tool that built the maze in the first place, repetition, and pointing it somewhere new, one small, unremarkable choice at a time, until the new path is the one your mind reaches for without being asked. The maze does not disappear. You simply stop being the one who is lost inside it and becoming the one who is finally allowed to choose which direction it grows.
Subscribe to join the reflection and welcome to the channel.